Okay.
And we are recording. So, hello everybody. Welcome to this conversation about love. That's what Fiona just said. As I said in the invitation, it's the title is "Falling in Love with an Addict, Coming Back to Who We Are." Right, Fiona?
Yeah, getting back to who we really are.
Getting back to who we really are. This recording is being done for my group. You can't repeat the human out of you. As I said in the description, Fiona and I have had several conversations. And this particular conversation is very close to her heart. And one time I said, why don't we just have a conversation? Why don't we Zoom about it? Why don't we invite people so you can share all your insights? Because what Fiona keeps saying is that she's become an insight machine.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so guys, for the benefits of recording, I'm going to mute you all. And as I always do, I'd like to make this an organic conversation, which means that when Fiona is done with her sharing, then we'll be open to questions, we'll be open to comments, and to make it something that's really organic and create a space where we can share openly. So, Fiona, it's all yours.
Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for showing up. It's lovely to see you and to not see you for those people I can't see. It's kind of a bit strange actually because it's very silent with everybody muted. Yeah, Diane and I have had a number of conversations about, these are just little things that were showing up for me actually as part of my life and also part of my coaching practice. And it's been very transformational for me. I mean, the whole understanding of the principles has been very transformational for me. And I've been doing this I've heard of it for now about 4 years. And I started training with Jamie Smart about 3.5 years ago. And the whole thing has been very transformational, but it's actually really interesting to understand that in many ways, the most transformational bit has been since I stopped doing training per se, and started doing more, I guess. Yeah, I've dipped into little bits of training, but I've not been on a year program. And the what shifted in a sense more has just been appearing in my life and also appearing for me through being there for others. And I think that's kind of what I wanted to share here really, was that many things that I've learned have come back to me being enough and learning about self-love. And I guess in some ways that's where my journey started, in that I first started to see that I was good enough, and I previously believed that I wasn't. It's interesting how that kind of level of being enough and that kind of level of self-love has really increased over the years. And you know, I kind of had a bucket list when I first spoke to Jamie about these things, and in a way, kind of relationship was the one thing that was kind of at the top of the list, but in many ways has waited till last to shift. But I guess that's because relationship, you know, being around people that we don't have a choice to be, well, not necessarily that we don't have a choice, but I guess those that are closest to us, I guess, are sometimes the things that appear to trigger us the most. And I guess having this new understanding of love for me has really moved something else on as well. So it's interesting that I have a coach, and when I speak to my coach, she always tells me she loves me and she loves all her clients. And initially this kind of seemed slightly extreme to me, but actually now I'm really clear that that's where the difference happens, and that's what's really shown up for me. And I don't know whether you've heard in your experience about, actually, can I get a show of hands and see how many of you are coaches and how many of you are just people who are living the principles? So how many coaches? Sab, Elizabeth. Hi, Elizabeth. Okay, and Monique. Fantastic. You've probably noticed that, during your coaching, that this degree of stillness and being there for somebody else is a very kind of special place. And I hadn't initially thought about it being a special place of love, but I really believe that's exactly what it is right now. I really saw that. But and I guess what looks like it's, I mean, I had that wonderful feeling, and I had a very bizarre experience once when very early on when I was coaching someone, there was just this, Sid says, listen for a feeling. And there was just these amazing feelings going on in my body, just around me, while I was essentially listening really to this person speaking. And then the little voice started in my head, like, whoa, what's going on here? These feel like, this feels like love. I felt like I was falling in love with a guy. And, this was some guy I met a couple of times in a gym, and wasn't my cup of tea, and here he is sort of like bearing his soul on the other end of the phone. And I had all these crazy feelings going on, and this voice is saying, well, what are you doing? You can't be falling in love with this person. You don't know this person. Da, 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 da. And I was just, at the time, I was so into being in the space of listening to him. I just kind of was like, go away, flick, go away. I'm busy right now. I'm not even going to take any notice. Not even going to think about it. And I always remember that as being a very, very unusual kind of experience. It seemed very unusual, but in fact, I think now that in some ways it's those clients who almost are the ones that are what most people would call the most challenging, in a sense, I suppose. Where I kind of have to take myself so much more out of the way and just really be in the space and listen. That somehow that magic really comes out in that space. And that's not to say it doesn't happen with other people. It's just that perhaps I'm more conscious of being even stiller in those cases. Maybe, I don't know, perhaps ultimately, I guess that's all thinking, but when someone's going through a really, really tough time, then sometimes all I felt I can do is hold the space. And that's what happened earlier this year when I was talking to someone I'd been talking to for about 3 months, and he's been struggling with alcohol and drugs for some time. And I reached out to him when he was feeling very low, and we've been talking. But when I reflect back now, I see that there was still this level of ego going on. And in a way, at the time, I felt a bit powerless to help. So I just hung in there, really. And at one point, I had to take a real step back because he didn't want to be physically coached. So I really just took this place of being there for him, basically, and listening. And from time to time, shining the light on something he'd said or pointing him in another direction. But during some of this, what I can only describe really, I guess, as ego talk, something obviously got to the point where he felt triggered and he had a relapse. And it was very, very scary for me. It was one of the most, in fact, probably the most scariest thing I can say I've ever done. Being on the end of the phone, not knowing whether somebody is okay, because it was very, I just didn't know what was going on. He was there, he wasn't there, he'd put the phone down, disappear. He'd already told me that he'd, been in hospital and he'd been self-harming as well. And I had no idea what was going on the end of that phone. And as you know, like when they play the music in films and you've really no idea what's really going on, your mind starts to go. And I guess I just saw in that moment that all I have to do is hang on and not start to listen to the little voices in my head and just be there as best I could be. Because I didn't have the answers, much as I wanted the answers and much as I was sitting Googling like crazy on the other end of the phone to try and find somebody more competent to help him than me, or what seemed that way. Try as I might, I couldn't find anyone really. It was a weekend, everything was shut, and I did get in touch with a few people who sent me, but they didn't tell me anything I didn't already know, and there wasn't anyone else I could kind of refer him to, and that was part of the problem for him at the time, was that there was nowhere for him to go. So I realized in that moment that just meant that if it was me on the end of the phone, it just had to be me, and whatever happens, and that I'm not actually responsible for what happens. I can just be there. And as part of this, that process, I think I realized afterwards that all I could do was love, was just be there, hold the space and love. And what I came to see afterwards was that was unconditional love, because I had no control over anything that was going to happen for him or for me. And I literally had to be okay with whatever happened. People have said to me, you've got to protect yourself. But if I know that I'm ultimately okay, then I don't need to protect myself, because I have everything I already need. And in that moment, it didn't occur to me to protect myself. I literally just hung in there. And although my heart felt heavy, I guess, when he cut the phone off, I just had to be okay with that. And I realized afterwards that stepping back was the best and the only thing I could do. But it was also, for me, the only way I could articulate it was that it was unconditional love. And I think that was probably the first time that, in some ways, that I'd actually seen unconditional love. Being able to be there, love someone regardless of what happens, regardless of outcome, or regardless of what's going on for them, however difficult their life was. Because what I've always seen with this particular person is that they're not a, I don't even like to say alcoholic. They're not an alcoholic. They're not a druggie, or, I don't even think they've got an alcohol and drug problem. They have a misunderstanding problem, an innocent misunderstanding problem, where they get wrapped up in the illusion of what looks real to them at any moment. And that's all it is. And what came to me afterwards as well was that, you know, many of us are addicts. And for sure, I've been an addict. Probably still am addicted to some things. Because a lot of my journey was an innocent addiction to suffering. And perhaps that's partly what his journey is too. I was so stuck in something. So, it was as comfortable as it was uncomfortable, that suffering. I didn't want to be suffering. I didn't choose to be suffering. It wouldn't have been on my, this is my game plan, this is it for me. It wouldn't have been on that list, for sure. But it was what I was used to, because I believed the way I saw the world was real. And I even went through, when I started to see the light with all of this, I went through I actually went through a grieving process of grieving for myself, that someone could have made herself so ill with her own thoughts. And it's innocent. It's a misunderstanding that all of us go in and out of many, many times a day. And it's totally innocent. But I had this kind of grieving going on. And perhaps that's because there was a little, I don't know. I don't recall there being a little voice saying, look how bad you are because you put yourself through this. But maybe that is partly where the grieving comes from. Because I have a very different view on grieving too now. As a result of losing my sister last year. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I actually said to this particular person, I had a conversation with him afterwards about how difficult that phone call was for me, because I felt like I was more attached to his well-being than he was. I thought to that point the most difficult thing I'd ever done in my life was sit in a hospital room holding my sister's hand and watching her die. But to be sort of metaphorically holding someone's hand who seemed to have little regard for his life and who potentially was killing himself on the other end of the phone, when my mind and my movie maker could kind of make up what might be happening, in many ways was much more scary. But what I also saw was that I had to let go of that attachment to his well-being, because that's none of my business. His well-being's his business, not mine. I can be there to support. I actually can't do anything about it. That's not my role either. I can just hold a space and try to shine a light when it's relevant, or when his mind is open enough to see, eyes are open enough to see the light, ears are open enough to hear something different. But really what I've seen through that kind of that letting go of the attachment to his well-being, that letting go of any outcome, that brought me back to unconditional love, loving regardless. Monique, you said something, I think. Do you want to unmute yourself? I've watched you nodding through this, so I'm guessing you might have something to add to.
I had a similar experience with a friend of mine, and also what you say, like first you have you mourn, like you feel like you have done something wrong, but you haven't done anything wrong because it is their choice to be for themselves, and also to try and find out how they work for themselves, at least in case of my friend. And for me also, it was like a battle with me myself, to let it go. And it doesn't matter what kind of outcome it would be. We just wait and see. And the only thing I could do, what you say, just be there, to listen, sometimes to give another view on the things that they tell, and that's all you can do. And at the point that you really can let go, then you will have peace in your own heart, but you also give them the real freedom to be themselves. And I think they also, in a way, they feel like you don't expect anything anymore.
Yeah.
So that's why I was nodding.
Yeah. And I think that's so powerful for them, that if you're not expecting anything, then you're also equally, you're not judging them about anything either.
Yeah.
And that's really important. It's really important to them, particularly for people who've maybe been struggling with addiction kind of issues, because they get judged by lots of people all the time. And even sometimes the people most close to them, by their families, and it's not their family's fault. It's probably because they're at their wits' end for loving this person and wanting to help, and it's seemingly looking like they are paying no attention whatsoever. And even to me, at one point, it started to look like what the hell is going on here? I care more about whether you live or die than you do,
Yeah. That's how it happens, yeah.
But once I let go of that, I was able to be in a much better position to support. And we have a most amazing relationship now. I mean, it's much more like friends. It's not formal coaching in any way.
That's the same.
There's a wonderful, wonderful happy ending to this story, because we're now on like 50 odd days clean and dry. So, and there's been blip times in the middle when, he's come back to me and said today would have been a relapse day. But he's really seeing for himself that his feelings are not linked to what he used to think they were linked to. And that he doesn't have to listen to the little voice in his head that says, oh shit, get a drink. And it's magical. It's absolutely magical. And I'm so proud of him. So proud of him. It's not my business to be proud. I got no right to do that. And hey, guess where that's coming from? Inside me. But, I like that feeling right now, so I'm hanging on with it.
That's true. And it's like what you say, it's like you're proud of them. It's not that you're proud because you did something, but you're proud of what they have done.
I mean, I've invested a lot of my time. I've given quite generously of my time, and I've done it because I care. And it's not because I knew this person either, because I didn't. It was a complete stranger. We happen to be quite good friends now, but initially it was a complete stranger. And there was a point where I felt like I am going to have to walk away from this and just leave him to live life on his own, because I can't be there every second of every day. There were times initially in the early days where I literally wanted to, it doesn't even live in the same city as me. So there were times when I wanted to jump on a train and go out and save him. But, that's just not real. It's just not real. Because I'm also aware that, however much I'm here, if he starts relying on me for life to be okay, he's pointing in the wrong direction.
True.
Because I'm not the one who saved him. Yeah, I shone a light. Yeah, I said some words sometimes. And yeah, I always was there with, love and compassion. But, well, perhaps not always. There's certainly been times where I haven't felt it quite so much. But, certainly latterly, there's always been, since I've had this kind of massive kind of realization for myself, it's love. But there's not, sometimes there's things he says and I go, but I just keep it to myself. It's a feeling. I let the feeling happen in me. I notice it, but I don't say anything about it. I don't spend paying any attention to it. I just carry on listening.
True.
And I think that's kind of really valuable. But let's face it, if we were struggling like that, we would want someone who just listened, wouldn't we? And in fact, it's really interesting because he's actually told me since that, when I'm in that position, all I wanted was someone to put their arms around me and love me.
Yeah, true.
I just wanted a hug. But, it's not appropriate for the authorities, whether they're hospital police or whoever. It's not appropriate for those professionals to give people hugs. So he couldn't get that, but he got a metaphorical hug from me, I guess. But isn't that interesting? And for me now, I just really, really want, I'm so interested to become involved with some addiction projects, because I just think what I've seen about people just being in their, all of us being in our shit, basically, is, it's not, they're just human. They just happen to have made different choices to dealing with their shit than what we do.
Now I see Sab nodding. What are you thinking?
What are you thinking, Sab? Share us your thoughts.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
So, really interesting little story, discourse there, Fiona. Thank you for sharing that. Really, I haven't got anything specific to say, but it has stimulated quite a few thoughts there. Things like this idea of just giving people a space, and it's not our responsibility to save them, but to help them save themselves if that's what's going to happen. And it's so difficult to do. It's so difficult to shut up, and it's so difficult to not give them the answers that we think would work for them because they kind of maybe once worked for us. It's really tricky to do that, to shut up. But that's exactly what they need, is someone to shut up. And what I find sometimes is they ask a question of us, expecting maybe an answer, because maybe that's what they've had in the past, and we don't give them one. And that kind of frustrates them, and then they start answering their own question to fill in the silence. I mean, I'm probably not telling you anything you don't know, but it still amazes me. And of course, they come up with the real answer for themselves, the one that we couldn't have given anyway, even if we had jumped in. And that's a wonderful thing to see. So as you said, Fiona, you didn't save him. You certainly helped, but helped through your presence, but you helped him to see his own solutions, I'm sure. I don't know if you want to comment on that. There's another little thing I'll tell you in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think in the moment necessarily there were solutions that popped up. Like I said, I was kind of just there, and I mean, who knows how many hours I would have been there if he hadn't put the phone down. And we've had lots of conversations that have gone on for like 2-3 hours. And initially it's really interesting, because initially it would be just like, and I was like, take a breath. But now he really gets into that quiet space, which is lovely, and he's, and I think what I found was that, in a sense, there was no help I could give. Whether my doing nothing was of a help, that maybe so, but I think probably when I started coaching, I was very inclined to sort of give people, maybe point to solutions that I'd tried or had seen other people try or whatever. But now I kind of shut up. And what I do sometimes is share stories which maybe have some kind of parallel to something they've been talking about, and then generally stories out of my own experience. Like, for example, I might talk about family relationships if he's been talking about family relationships, and I just I talk about how I've learned to have compassion for people in my family that I didn't have before, because I couldn't see that they're in their stuff just as much as I'm in my stuff. And even though I see through my stuff a lot better these days, they don't necessarily. And just by being able to have compassion for people, I mean, I just tell stories. And then sometimes I'm rewarded by 3 weeks later, they come back and tell me something and I go, oh, do you realise I've never heard you speak about your father in that way before? And whether what I said made any difference whatsoever, I don't know. But actually it doesn't matter, because what's important is their relationship has started to shift with somebody else. That's important to them.
There's I don't know if you find this sort of thin line between giving them a story or maybe a metaphor or an anecdote about your life, which you think will be helpful to them, and just going off the rails and starting to talk about yourselves. And, you know, like people do in some conversations, it's almost one-upmanship. Of course, it shouldn't be in coaching, but, you know, it's like, you think that was bad, listen to what happened to me. And I'm talking about myself. I really tried hard to not do that, but I do the sort of in French we say accompagnement, accompanying people through sharing my experiences as well. I do inject myself into it, because I don't want to be like some sort of therapist who just says that sort of thing. But I am very wary of not turning the focus onto me.
Yeah. No, this is not about turning the focus onto me at all.
But when you do tell stories, I think it's so valuable, especially ones that have got a really good illustration of something which might help them. And they may not see something immediately, but it will ruminate. You know, when they're at home or they're on the train, and they'll be thinking about that, and they'll maybe realize, first of all, they're not alone, and secondly, they'll get some sort of insight. So that's really nice. And
maybe they won't be ruminating about it at all. It might just come as a flash of insight, or it may not. They may just do something differently and not even see that they've done it differently. Or they may do something differently and think, oh, that's strange. Don't think I've ever said that to my dad before, or done that with my dad before. And they may not see it. I mean, I think that's the value possibly of having ongoing conversations, is that, you know, I was able to shine the light and say, oh, I've never heard you talk about your father that way before. And they sounded surprised. But, you know, and I don't think he'd necessarily seen that at the time. But I think, the thing with the stories is that it's about following that kind of your inner wisdom, isn't it? Because sometimes it's just not going to be right to share stories. And sometimes it's okay to put them in, or you just sort of tentatively start and see what the reaction is. Because the minute the reaction starts to get sort of like, I don't want to listen, I just back off, drop it. But if there seems to be some space and some listening, then I'll continue. And I'm at the stage now where I'm being asked questions, and I was never asked questions before.
If I may add to this, in my experience as a coachee and as a coach, stories I remember the first story I heard from my coach, I thought, what the hell is she going on about? What on earth? And our lives were so parallel. I mean, what we felt was very parallel, but her life was different to mine. But 3 days later, I was still thinking about one particular word, just one. And another thing about the spotlight not being on ourselves, I think we can only do and be exactly what we have, what occurs to us in the moment. Whatever comes up, and we can't do any worse or better than that. So I've stopped worrying if I'm saying the wrong thing, because I mean, at one point I turned up for a client. I was in a terrible state. I was really in a terrible state. It was one of the best conversations I've ever had with a client. I just showed up and said, I'm really not fine. And I shared my story, and then her story just poured out, and then she had her own insights. And so I really believe that whatever occurs is not wrong, it just is.
And I think that's a really powerful point, actually, Diane, because it's a part of the storytelling, in a way, is by drawing a parallel, rather than saying, I did this, you have a go at that. That's prescriptive. That's giving someone a direction. That's giving them a technique or a tool, which the principles isn't, because we all have it all the time already. But telling the story is like, it is shining a light on something that maybe could be different. And I think what you're saying, Diane, is it's really important for us to not be seen as the guru person who has all the answers.
Not the experts.
Not we are.
No.
We're not experts. We maybe have slightly more understanding about how life works, but in some moments we sure as hell don't have. And what's important to them is to see that we're human too, and that actually it's okay to be human. I think that's really important. It's okay to be human.
I find myself pointing constantly towards in that direction. Show up, warts and all, you're human. That's what I'm pointing to.
I'm curious to hear what Fingers heard, actually.
Okay.
As somebody who's maybe not a coach and is on her first call. So you can unmute yourself, Chinga. You don't have to put your video on if you don't want to.
Hiya.
Just tell us what you've been hearing. I'm curious.
I'm not a coach or facilitator, but I'm actually in training as a counselor.
Okay.
So what I have been hearing, what I'm finding curious, is that it sounds like you're all people that share the three principles that help people with that. And I wondered if I don't know, there's something about the motivation for sort of a person like you to specifically choose this area. I take it one or the other. You share. You coach people with addictions, or you are around addictions area. I was just curious about if it was because any of you had maybe experiences to do with that, or there's some sort of interest that sort of pointed you towards wanting to help people in that area.
Well, for me personally, I've never drawn a line around what somebody's issue may be. I mean, I'm open to talking to anyone about anything. And prior to speaking to this particular person, I hadn't dealt with addictions as a specific thing. So it's not been an area that I've been motivated to seek out. And in fact, the area that I'm sort of focusing on in terms of my marketing, if you want to call it that, I suppose, is more around stress and overwhelm at work. But up to now, I've literally just been open. If somebody is struggling or wants to see something new or just wants to have a conversation, I'm open to it. And it got me in there somewhere where many times I didn't know where I was going or whether I actually had the skills to handle it, to be honest. But what I am seeing is that we all have the skills all the time, provided we can keep what clutters up our heads and our thinking and our wisdom, as long as we can keep that out of the way. So by staying in that, and it's not a technique, because as Diane's just said, you don't have to be in a quiet space when you show up. But very often I find myself getting into that quiet space quite quickly by just being there for someone else. Because, call me an addict, but I like being in the space of love. And I'm guessing I'm not alone in that.
No.
Yeah. And so no, I haven't specifically. I'm curious to see what else is possible with a group, to support groups, because I do feel that I really saw this person struggle in not being able to get any further help, and being kind of bounced between various different services, all of which were saying, oh no, you need to go there, you need to go there, you need to go there. And, just being bounced, and no one being willing to just show up and say, hey, I see you've got a problem. Do you want an ear? And I know it's possible for people to, leave behind addictions. There are plenty of people out there, famous people, very well respected, wealthy coaches who were once alcoholics. And there are many people who are working in the city, and even even the guy who wrote the book Conversations with God, whose name's gone out of my head, I believe he was an alcoholic too. So there's just the fact that once you had this kind of addiction, which is after all just a label, to some kind of substance, because at the time you misunderstood that by having it in your life it might create something better or help your feelings be better. It doesn't make you a bad person, and it sure as hell doesn't make you someone who can't make better decisions with a clearer mind. And I don't know about you, but I've certainly been in a sufficiently intoxicated state where decision making might have looked difficult, but yet I've managed to make some very sensible decisions about getting myself home. So making sensible decisions is still possible, even under the influence, when our wisdom shows up stronger than our negative thinking or unhelpful thinking. And perhaps being under the influence makes a difference as to whether we see the sensible ideas, perhaps, and maybe it makes a difference as to whether we follow them. Who knows? That's not my area of specialism. But what I have definitely seen is that being loved, being heard is really important to people.
And you know what? I think we don't have to have a label of a coach. I think it's...
No.
I've been there for people before I embarked on this journey on being a coach. I've been there for people. I've just listened.
Yeah.
I've not said a damned word. I was just there, and then they said, "Oh, this was really a wonderful conversation. Thank you. Bye." And they go away feeling better. I haven't done anything. They've just seen things for themselves. So, and another point I'd like to make is that we label addiction, the label, hang on a minute. We don't necessarily have to have an alcohol. It's not just an alcoholic substance or a drug. You know, there is addiction to chocolate, addiction to food.
There's addiction to Facebook.
There's addiction to Facebook. It's
addiction to suffering. You know, we're all addicts of some kind or other. Addiction to sugar is a really massive one in today's world. In fact, it's probably the most destructive.
It's more addictive than cocaine, than heroin. There have been studies.
And it's readily available.
It's interesting in the Netherlands.
Personally, I have an addiction to fresh air, you know.
It's interesting in the Netherlands. They started a campaign just recently. I don't want to digress, but it just popped up for me. And they're asking consumers to return prepackaged food like meats or that have sugar in them, to return them to the shops. They've just started this campaign a few days ago.
Wow. Interesting. I'd be really interested to hear where that goes.
Yeah, me too. I just heard it a couple of days ago because it is added into everything. But I digress. Chinga, I'm wondering if your question was answered. If you want to add anything more.
Yeah, I was just curious, and yeah, I think to an extent it was answered. I would, you know, it's funny you mentioned addictions you were mentioning, because that's kind of what brings me here. Just trying to sort out or to figure out different ways of dealing with things, and sort of being aware of the three principles, seeing what works for other people, but having this kind of understanding, being aware that it's easy to be swept along maybe other people's ideas of how to deal with, you know, with addictions, and I suppose finding one's way within different ways, and still staying true to, for me, what feels real and true, which comes from the understanding of the three principles. So I suppose my experience has been sort of over time, being able to see whatever, maybe whatever services are on offer to help, and still make decisions for myself about what I am willing to go along with. I don't know if that even makes sense, but yeah. So this is interesting to me because the topic of the webinar had was around addictions, and so that's where I'm coming from.
So in your counselling training, is addiction something that you're specifically interested in following up?
Not necessarily, but it's something I understand very much, and it's it's just one of many areas that I feel like I would be better placed to be of service.
I think you'll find, I mean, not that I've done counselling training at all, but I mean, I had been part of, I have been part of group counselling, and oh, I'm sorry we didn't get to talk to you, Elizabeth. If you're able to hang on for 2 seconds, I would love to come and hear what you've got to say.
I realized I needed to leave at 9, so I'm really, really sorry. That please connect me on your next conversation.
Okay, that's wonderful. We will do. Thank you for joining.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, I think, Chinga, that from that you will probably find it pretty interesting, that the kind of to see the differences between what for traditional counselling training and anything related to the 3 principles will actually throw up, because I'm sure there will be massive differences certainly on techniques and on how things are done. And how long have you known about or heard about the principles?
For quite a while. I'd say about 4 to 5 years.
Okay.
And sort of in my second year of the training. So before this, I have had, I feel like I've always had, well, for the amount of time that I've been aware of the 3 principles, I've had it in sort of the background. It's an understanding that sort of is I'm aware of. I've been aware of going through my life. So starting the counseling was interesting, actually, because I know where I stand with with the way I see life working, and they are all different, like you say, techniques and other ways of helping that are taught. So I take that on, but not take it on, but then it's what's taught, and I can see where I differ with that, and that's fine, because my intention wasn't to change the whatever is coming from outside. It's I'll get my qualification, and I feel like I would work or serve from my understanding. So it was.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to pick up from what you said before was that you mentioned about me sort of like training 3 principles. To be honest, I don't teach the 3 principles. I hardly ever. I do mention thought, but I don't. I never talk about mind, thought, and consciousness. Actually, I'm doing a talk on Monday, which is about overcoming overwhelm, and I'm just not talking about. I talk about the thought, feeling, connection, but I'm not going to talk about the 3 principles, because I think it to do so kind of encourages people to go off down a rabbit warren of like needing to understand what each of those 3 words meant, and that's not really what's important. It's understanding the spirit of it that's what's important. And I don't, to be honest, I don't feel qualified even to try and explain what mind, thought, and consciousness are and how they interact. And I just tell people about what seems right for me about those things through stories. And sometimes it works spectacularly well, and other times it doesn't. So, how about you, Sue? We haven't heard from you.
Hi. Yeah, the one thing that did resonate with me when you was talking was your referral to addiction to self-suffering.
Mm.
Would you say that habitual behavior is the same thing?
Yeah, it probably is. I mean, you could, I don't know, is habitual behavior the same as suffering? I don't know. Some
No, as
habitual
an
behavior is
addiction to
okay, but as
suffering?
an addition, yeah. I mean, I guess it depends. I mean, I think what I meant by being addicted to the self-suffering was, in a sense, was that I so believed it was true, I wasn't prepared to take on anyone else's idea that it could work any other way. And even though it felt really awful and I didn't want it to be that way, and I was desperate for someone to show me it was different, I just couldn't countenance the idea that it could be anything other than the way that I saw it at the time, which is just an innocent misunderstanding.
Mm.
And I guess if the habitual behavior is something similar to that, where you just cannot, almost defiantly refuse to do it any differently, then I guess then it's just as addictive.
Yeah, that's
Because
interesting.
there's this attachment word. This was something really interesting that I saw around this time as well. It's like there's this sort of attachment to it. In my self-suffering, I was almost attached to being a victim. And I've seen this with other people that I've worked with. And, you know, like, there are some people who I feel like I'm not making any headway with, but it's because they're attached to being a victim. And, you know, it's not that they're consciously going, I want to feel bad. But they're believing the stories about you've always been like this, you'll always be like this. They're so believing those to be true that they're attached to them being true.
Mm.
Because for some reason, even though they don't want to be like that, they're attached to the label. And I think I think maybe that's almost a form of it. Because it's funny because I guess people think, most ordinary human beings walking on the street think that people who are addicted to alcohol want to be addicted to alcohol. And probably they don't. Not really, in their heart of hearts, they don't want to be addicted to alcohol. They're just stuck with it because, one, they don't know any different. They believe it's the best answer at the time. And two, it starts to have chemical reactions on the body that make it more difficult to put it down. And in fact, actually, this is something I didn't know, but actually it can be really dangerous for you if you've been drinking a lot over a period of time to suddenly stop. Really dangerous.
Yeah,
so
because
actually,
apparently the impact on the liver is quite severe when it happens that way.
But you can have heart failure if you just stop. You can have brain damage just from just stopping. It's because from a seizure, and I didn't know that. So actually, when it's very difficult because suddenly somebody who's spent all their money on some kind of substance is desperately crying out for money to get some more, and people think no, can't give them money because that's what they'll do. They'll just drink it. They'll just this. But actually, you know what? You could save their life by giving them some money. But what I'm really seeing is that they need the support underneath as well. Because you can't just change something by giving them a different drug to take the place of it or whatever. If you're not, I mean, Bill Pettit said this beautifully in one of those recordings. If you don't help them see the underlying misunderstanding the potential for relapse is so much higher. Because once they see, which is exactly what's happening with this person I've been talking to, once they see that it's a misunderstanding, that they don't have to take their thoughts seriously, they're more in control to not do that, even when it doesn't feel too good. You know, I've just been through, you know, like a week with this person, and I've been like, inside me, there's been little feelings about which I said nothing, of like, oh dear, this doesn't sound like it's going down the right road to me. And those feelings start to look like I should know what to do about it and how to stop it. But in reality, I just have to shut up and let them alone. Because actually, he did exactly what he would do. And what he's designed to do, he self-corrected and came out of it the other side. Without me having to come up with a special answer or do anything or whatever. I really saw that. Literally self-corrected from one day to the next. Bang.
The other thing,
today I feel great, and it makes no sense to be. I'm glad I didn't listen to those feelings, because it makes absolutely no sense to me to do so.
Yeah, the other thing that you said was that if you just wanted somebody to care, somebody to hug, somebody to talk to, somebody to just be there. You know, it didn't have to be in the physical form. You know, you obviously wasn't in the same town. But yeah, I was in a similar situation last year. And I get that, totally get that. You know, I rang Samaritans and I just sobbed on the phone to this guy who didn't say a word to me. But when I come off that phone, I knew I was going to see tomorrow. And that's very, very powerful. Just to have, and that's what kind of, you know, the most precious thing anybody could give you is their time. Because it's the one thing, A, they can never get back. And B, you feel that somebody cares when they give you their time. And that's massive. You know, for somebody who's suicidal, it makes them feel like they're not alone. You know, and to not be alone when you're feeling that low is everything. Because all I got from the medical profession was drugs, and more drugs. You know, they just wanted to sedate me constantly.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
You know,
I think what's important though, it's not necessarily the time. I wholly appreciate that time is important, but if it's time when you're not present, then it's not as valuable.
Yeah.
So it's the presence that makes the difference, and that presence is being in that kind of state of love, I guess.
And you can feel that even really through a screen or something.
Yeah. Or just on the end of a phone, even in silence.
Yeah. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah. You know, I still feel a bit awkward with silences. I still feel that sometimes, it's like an awkward silence rather than a nice, peaceful silence. But again, that I'm recognizing that's just, you know, my ego, my personal thought, and it doesn't have to be taken seriously at all. And I used to always want to I always believed that, you know, I didn't love myself enough, that I never loved myself enough. And one of the things since we've been on this webinar that I've realised is I've always had that self-love there. I've just covered it up.
Yeah.
I've just covered it up. And that's a beautiful place to be.
That's lovely. That's really lovely. So valuable to know that, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm going to get emotional in a minute.
Well, I was just thinking that that's just a lovely, lovely note to wind this up, maybe.
Yes, I was
That's
thinking
what
the
you're
same
thinking,
thing.
Diane?
Yes, perfectly. I think this is where we can stop this conversation. It's been wonderful. Thank you for your input, Fiona. Thank you all
You're
for
very
being
welcome.
here. Thank you, Sue, for sharing from your heart. It was a pleasure just listening to you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
sweetheart.
Oh, well, thank you,
It means a lot.
everybody, for sharing. Yeah.
I went
Please do, you know, friend me on Facebook if we're not friends already. Reach out whenever you want to. It's always lovely to have new friends. And friends, like Facebook friends, to me, it's like I love, you know, friends I talk to. You know, I've never met Diane, but I feel I know her so well. And we talk regularly, and sometimes, as she said in the post, you know, we lie in bed in our PJs or whatever and have these conversations, and it's like we've been best friends forever. Those are the friends I want. You know, I don't need somebody who just clicks on friend and then ticks like every now and then. I want communication. For me, the connection is what's really important. And it's been really lovely to have all of you sharing so beautifully this evening.
Yes, thank you very much. And you all once again. And I look forward to seeing you again. I'm going to unmute you all so we can say our byes. And I'll see you on the next Zoom call. Good night.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thanks, Irina.
Bye.
Nice to meet you all.
Bye.
Bye.